This happened once before, when I came to your door, no reply.
Beatlemania was at its peak in 1964. The Beatles' schedule that year consisted of constant touring around the world amongst several other appearances on programs. Because of all the commitments, they had little time to come up with 14 original compositions like their previous album, A Hard Day's Night, and as a result, the covers returned. Out of all the Beatles albums, this one seems to be the least remembered. It was sandwiched in between two film soundtrack albums and didn't have a single from the album. Does that mean the album is bad enough? Let's find out and have a listen to Beatles For Sale.
This happened once before, when I came to your door, no reply.
Starting things off with No Reply, which is a John Lennon original. We ended things off with I'll Be Back on the last album, and the tone carries right over to this song. This one really begins a string of downbeat songs that'll be a theme on this album. The highlight vocally is that chorus, which is absolutely fantastic. The tone of the verses lead right into it, and it takes off here. Speaking of the tone, this song really uses a lot of minor chords, and they are essential in the song as a result. That same emotion that was really felt in I'll Be Back returns here. The song really is unique in so many ways, being the first downbeat album opener and really signaling things to come. It's easily a good song. So many aspects of the song are just really fantastic and just show off how much this band has come in just 1 year of Beatlemania. Sure, this song is still a breakup song, which they have done before, but definitely not in a fashion like this. The closest song to this thematically is probably Anna from Please Please Me, but that song was a cover and definitely not as melancholy as this one. It's really a brilliant song and sad that it's buried under the Beatles' discography. If you ask me, this one is right up there with the previous three album openers quality-wise.
And I lost someone who's near to me. I'm a loser, and I'm not what I appear to be.
Following suit is I'm a Loser, which is another John Lennon composition. This is where you start to realize that the Beatles are really getting influenced. Bob Dylan was actually one of their biggest ones, and his influence on the Beatles started here. That's why the highlight vocally is John Lennon's performance himself. The style he sings in here is really like Bob Dylan. It's strange because for a singer who has a tenor-styled voice, he hits a lot of lower range notes, which is kind of like what you'd expect from a baritone singer like Sinatra. However, it works really well here because of the theme of the song. The structure of this song is fantastic as well. Every other line Lennon sings, he kind of adds his own pessimistic little twist to it, which is really brilliant. In fact, the lyrics of this song itself are very strong. It's mostly because of the Dylan influence, but it goes right off the previous two songs I've talked about, where it's really downbeat. The vocabulary here though stands out especially, and that best line section pretty much showcases what most of this song is like. Musically, I really admire that guitar and harmonica solo. It's a pretty quick solo, yet it's very effective. Sadly, this song is the last Beatles song that will actually feature the harmonica for quite a while. It makes a great farewell though, because this song is amazing. Everything here just clicks to me. Lennon's downbeat vocals and perfectly written lyrics, the brilliant guitar and harmonica solo, and just the progression of John Lennon's songs since the first album. This is the same guy who wrote songs like Ask Me Why just a year prior. It's quite fascinating, honestly.
She thinks of him, and so she dresses in black. And though he'll never come back, she's dressed in black.
The dark tone continues in the next track, Babies in Black. This one happens to be the darkest track on the album, since it's actually implied that someone's dead. That is pretty interesting. The vocal highlight are those amazing harmonies between John and Paul during the bridge. Seriously, those two have a perfect blend of voices, and whenever they harmonize, it really becomes amazing to hear. Musically, I really love the pace of this song, which is 6/8, or commonly known as waltz time. The thing about waltz time is that it really gets your feet tapping along and settles you down a bit because of how relaxed it is. While the song isn't as amazing lyrically as the previous two songs, it still definitely holds up throughout the album, and when it all adds up, this is yet another good song. This is the fourth straight album where the first three songs are great. Pretty amazing that they always seem to get off to a good start and get the ordering of the album right in the beginning. This one might not be a classic, but it's a really fantastic song nevertheless, and actually a really popular song that the Beatles played live on their tours from 1965 until they stopped touring.
Got a backbeat, you can't lose it. Any old time you use it. Gotta be rock roll music if you wanna dance with me.
At long last, we get an upbeat track with the first cover on this album, Rock and Roll Music. As much as I love Chuck Berry's original version, I think the Beatles did this one pure justice. John Lennon returns to his form from Twist and Shout, pelting out each line with no mercy. His voice goes along perfectly well with the frantic instrumentals, led by the piano and guitar, played by George Martin and George Harrison respectively. The best part about this song though is how it changes in each verse. The tone stays the same, but the musicianship kind of changes style each verse, and my personal favorite is the last verse where John mentions the tango. All of a sudden we get some Latin-styled instrumentation, which is led by that interesting percussion from Ringo. If there was ever a real live favorite, this song is exactly that. It's a great song. It captures exactly what made the Beatles a must-see event every time they toured. The girls might have been a little overboard whenever they would scream for the entire show, but for songs like this, which just has so much energy and enthusiasm into it, I would actually scream myself, to be honest. This, in my opinion, might be one of their best covers flat out. It's that amazing.
One day you'll look to see I've gone, for tomorrow may rain, so I'll follow the sun.
After the frantic pace of the last track, we slow down with I'll Follow the Sun. This is the first appearance of Paul McCartney as the main songwriter, and it's not just John Lennon who's grown as a writer. This is Paul McCartney's version of a pessimistic ballad, and it's really a beautiful song. His tender vocals are definitely the highlight, which peaked during the middle eight. They match that soft guitar work excellently, but really the strength here is the lyrics. They're actually kind of poetic and showcase a bit of imagery with the chorus. Despite being a breakup song, it's one of those beautiful ballads which you don't see too often for a song describing a finished relationship. It's on the lines of If I Fell, except that Paul McCartney wrote this one. What I love most about this song is how different it is. Ringo Starr doesn't even play on the drums here. He taps his hands against his palm for the percussion, which I think is a perfect fit. Drums could have ruined the tender feeling a little bit, so I'm glad this one is just on a guitar. It's definitely a good song. If there's any flaw to this one, it's that it's too short. It's way too poignant to only last a little over a minute. I get that it might have overstayed its welcome had it been longer, but I know Paul McCartney could have came up with a way to extend the length of the song and make it work somehow. Regardless, this one is a hidden gem that really stands out on this album.
I think you're fine, 'cause we love you, Mr. Moonlight.
Moving along, we have our second cover now in Mr. Moonlight. After quite possibly the most shocking opening in any Beatles song so far, which is the vocal highlight, we get into the song, which is, well, really a mixed bag. On one hand, the bass work by McCartney really stands out amongst the rather relaxed instrumentals from everyone. On the other though, that kind of causes the song to be a bit of a slog. It's slow-paced, and while that definitely has worked for the Beatles numerous times up to this point, it's really easy to mess up a slow song. The harmonies here aren't too impressive until the very end where they slowly rise, but by that point, the song is already faded out. It still had enough though to be a decent cover with John Lennon giving forth yet another tremendous vocal performance. Then we get to that organ solo. Oh dear. It's not awful or anything, but it sounds so out of place. The Beatles rarely used the organ on any of their previous songs, but for an organ solo itself, let alone a really mediocre one where it just repeats the melody of the song in bland fashion too. To be the only solo in the song is really surprising. They should have let George wing one or something. Anyways, this one is really just okay. It's not bad, but it's a bit of a step down for a Beatles cover. It's not too memorable aside from John Lennon's performance, but not even he can really lift this song to the quality of the other songs we've seen so far. Now, if you like this one, great, I don't mind it. However, it's definitely not as good as most of the covers we've seen from the Beatles so far. On a bright note though, this is only the second okay cover from the Beatles out of the 14 covers they've done so far. That's still pretty incredible.
Kansas City, gonna get my baby one time. Yeah, yeah. I'm going to Kansas City.
We We get back to upbeat rockers to cap off side 1 with Kansas City, Hey Hey Hey. Paul McCartney's rock voice is back and better than ever here. He really carries the song's melody right on the back of his vocal cords and really goes along perfectly with the exceptional guitar work put forth here. A song like this is just perfect for live shows where the audience is already excited. Sure enough, this one was a live favorite for them, and they definitely took advantage when they played it in Kansas City in 1964. Midway through the song, after a nice guitar solo, we get to the Hey 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 part of the song. This is where the harmonies kick in and send you off rocking as side 1 of this album comes to an end. It's a decent song throughout, and I'd certainly have to call this one good. It doesn't quite have the energy from rock and roll music or twist and shout, but it's definitely upbeat enough and gets you tuned in pretty quickly. In general though, it's a nice contrast from all the pessimism we've had from this side, and a natural choice to end off the side with.
Nothing but love, babe. 8 days a week.
If you're still pumped from the end of side 1, oh boy, you're in for a better treat with the opener to side 2, 8 days a week. The verses in this song have that same passion that songs like She Loves You and I Wanna Hold Your Hand have. That Paul and John voice is back, and it's impossible not to get hooked to this song, let alone those voices. They carry this song right after that really nice fade-in intro. As I've said before, fade-in or fade-out musical passages are my absolute favorite things in music. Here, it's a fade-in musical passage with a nice little hook that reappears at the end. As much as I love this song and how great it sounds, it's definitely a big step down lyrically. It goes back to the first 2 albums' level of simplicity, but honestly, I don't mind because it already has you hooked by the time you notice it. The title comes from yet another Ringo Starr malapropism that inspired the title of the last album I looked at. This is certainly, though, a great song. I'm not as in love with this song as most Beatles fans, but I certainly cannot ignore how great this one really is. I mentioned in the beginning that this album didn't have any singles for the UK, but in the US, this song was actually released as a single there, and as expected, it got to number 1, which was their 7th in just a little over a year. That's just incredible. This one I think could have been performed live, but it wasn't because the Beatles themselves didn't think too highly of this one. Notably John Lennon, who called this song lousy. They probably considered it behind their time, and from a lyrical standpoint, I totally understand. Musically though, no one can get this one out of their heads, and they probably won't anytime soon.
Love you. Whisper soft and true. Darling, I love you.
Up next is the 4th cover, Words of Love. Among the many Beatles influences was Buddy Holly, who ruled the 50s along with Elvis. The Beatles perfectly emulate his style here vocally. The harmonies really shine despite really being monotonous at some parts. Likewise, the guitar work is also decent throughout, although it doesn't change that much. Honestly guys, I don't know what to think of this song. It's a solid cover, but when you get down to it, it's really forgettable in the context of this album. It's, well, okay. It's not a bad cover in any stretch of the imagination, don't get me wrong. However, this definitely isn't at their good level of covers. The good level being those loud, energetic covers like rock and roll music or Twist and Shout, or even those soft yet effective numbers like Till There Was You. This one is really in between in the sense that it has some nice parts to it, but isn't a song that I'd really come to on its own. Now, if you like this cover, I completely understand, because the nice parts might shine brighter for some people. To me, though, I think this song was simply done better by the Beatles in other songs. That being said, though, it's definitely a decent cover, and a nice tribute to Buddy Holly.
Honey, don't. I say you will when you won't. Honey, don't.
Next is another cover, Honey Don't. This is Ringo Starr's first song on vocals since I Wanna Be Your Man. This one is definitely interesting. The vocal highlight is Ringo actually calling out George before he responds with the guitar solo, which is the instrumental highlight. If there's anything to remember about this song, it's that. Aside from that though, there's really not much here that I really enjoyed. It's neat that this is a rare instance of a Beatles country song, but the execution could have probably been a little bit better. It's really just way too relaxed for my liking, which is exactly what the last song did for me. Now, if you like country, I can easily see this one's appeal, especially with the guitar work. To me, though, it's just okay. And also, regardless of whether or not you like this one or the last one, it's evident that these two songs were really just album fillers. The only interesting thing about this song to really point out is that it's one of the only songs to be performed live by all 4 Beatles individually. As a recording though, it really doesn't leave you with much in my opinion.
Every little thing she does for me, yeah.
We get back to originals with Every Little Thing. After the last 2 covers, we finally get a bit of something here. The chorus in this song is fantastic. It's definitely the highlight because it's really sung so well by those combined voices of John Lennon and Paul McCartney. In fact, Lennon's voice is actually heard more prominently in this mix, despite McCartney being the writer. I don't know the specific reason for this, but Lennon does it justice regardless. The highlight instrumentally is that timpani. It's a special kind of drum which Ringo plays here, and you can really hear it during the verses. This song to me is definitely good. The guitar work in the song alone is distinct enough to make you want to come back to it. It's kind of sweet yet very effective. Even the lyrics are some of the more upbeat on this album. If the first side of the album ruins your good mood because of its downbeat nature, this song or 8 Days a Week definitely pick it back up. Sure, this song seems kind of simplistic, but it has things in it that you definitely want to come back to, and that's the important thing. Certainly a good song.
For the party, so I'll go. I would hate my disappointment to show.
Well, I spoke too soon. We get back to the downbeat songs with John Lennon's I Don't Want to Spoil the Party. Despite being downbeat, this one has a ton of highlights. The harmonies during the chorus are sensational, and at times I actually find them a little melodramatic because of the theme of the song. The lead guitar work here is really exceptional, and I think it conveys the melancholy feeling very well. Even the lyrics have a couple of nice stanzas worth checking out. All in all, this one is a really good song, and while I probably prefer No Reply and I'm a Loser in terms of lyrical content, and the latter instrumentally, this one is definitely up there in terms of the quality with those songs. There's so much in here that I really enjoy personally. The tone in John Lennon's voice really fits well alongside that great guitar work. The guitar solo is a nice little bit, as well as leading right into those great harmonies that I mentioned. It's also a song that I'm sure maybe someone can relate to thematically, so honestly, despite being a bit of a hidden track being on this album, it's really a gem that shows how great these downbeat songs can be.
Would it be too much to ask of you what you're doing to me?
Next we have What You're Doing, and speaking of hidden gems, this one is really that. The highlight vocally is that chorus, just based off how great McCartney's vocals convey the annoyance in this song. Theme alert, by the way, this isn't the only song that will be inspired by Jane Asher, who was dating Paul McCartney at the time. My favorite part though in the song is that riff. For the longest time this riff was stuck in my head, but I had no clue what song it was from. Months later I stumbled upon it here and I instantly fell in love with this track as a result. To me, this is easily among the best Beatles riffs, and it sadly doesn't get recognition because of this album. It's a shame because this song is absolutely great. Despite having some more downbeat lyrics, this one is a little bit more upbeat in nature, which is kind of like Misery from Please Please Me. It keeps on chiming, and there's really a ton of great stuff in here. That drum intro, for example, is unique because the Beatles don't really have too many drum introductions. It even ends the song the same way with the drum intro combined with the riff again, which is similar to how 8 Days a Week did its intro and outro. That guitar solo is awesome despite being rather short, and honestly, this song showcases how great Rickenbacker guitars in the 60s were. The melodies they created were really fantastic, and this song is no exception. Surely the perfect album closer.
Everybody's trying to be my baby. Everybody's trying to be my baby. Everybody's trying to be my baby now.
Whoops, they actually didn't end with a pessimistic song for the second album in a row. They decided to end with another cover, Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby, performed by George Harrison on lead. This one is really an example of a bad album closer. I get that they wanted to go the route of the first 2 Beatles albums with ending it with a rock and roll song, but I don't understand how the previous song wasn't good enough at that. This one is really bland, and no offense to George Harrison, but I don't think he does this one that much justice. He can do these rock and roll covers, just look at Roll Over Beethoven. However, the guitar work doesn't really amount to much for me here, and there's nothing too memorable about this one either. It's kind of funny how George sings some of the lines, but that's really about it. The only highlight in this song is the guitar solo because that's honestly the only thing I really liked. It fits the song very well and is kind of the only part in the song where the lead guitar shines. This one, though, is really okay. It's one of those covers you really forget because there's really nothing that interesting that happens in this song. If you like standard rock and roll, I get the appeal for this. Personally though, I was looking for a little bit more in an album closer. Sadly, this cover is one of the last covers the Beatles will ever do. It's a shame because this one was really lacking. We are far from done, folks. I still have to talk about 6 more songs, which are from the Untitled Sally EP and the I Feel Fine single. Starting off with, Untitled Sally. This one is really the defining act for Paul McCartney as a vocalist. Little Richard's performance was thought to be untouchable, but Paul McCartney came very close to topping the original. Not only is his vocal performance here incredible, but it just fits perfectly with that ragged lead guitar. This whole song is just pure chaos and I love it. It's definitely a good song. This one was so good that they would usually save it for last during some of their concerts. I have to admit, this one is an even better closer than Twist and Shout. It just leaves you with a really good feeling because it has all 4 Beatles in perfect form. Also, for those doubting that the Beatles were a rock band, just have a listen to this. This song is really amongst one of their finest rock songs.
Just the same, I never weep at night. I call your name.
Next we have I Call Your Name, which is a slightly slower paced, yet effective rock song. The vocal highlight here is definitely John Lennon's performance. I really love that chorus because it just hooks you in and follows that opening guitar passage so well. In fact, the guitar work might actually be the best part about this song. It really shows off how great that Rickenbacker guitar is. That sound really defined folk rock bands, and the Beatles were kind of turning into that from this album until at least Rubber Soul. Anyways, this one is certainly a good song. It's really a nice cover, and there's a lot of things that make this one enjoyable, from the vocals to the guitar work. It might not be as rock-tastic as the last one, but this one kind of has a similar impact, being a very solid rock song.
Our romance slow down. Baby, now you're moving way too fast.
And up next, Slow Down. This one is definitely the most unique one of the Untitled Sally EP. For one thing, it has a really nice piano hook which is played by producer George Martin. That's easily the musical highlight, but the vocal highlight are those fantastic screams before Lennon sings the title. It's so frantic, and if it weren't for Untitled Sally, this one would easily be one of their most chaotic songs. It's definitely a good song. This one goes by really fast, and it's really enjoyable at that. The only problem with this song is that guitar solo. It's really weak, and it sounds like a bunch of random notes glued together. However, if you can get past that, this one is really wonderful.
I said I'm sitting here watching Matchbox holding my clothes. I said I'm sitting here wondering Matchbox holding my clothes.
To conclude the Untitled Sally EP, we get Matchbox, which is Ringo Starr's time to shine. I didn't quite find his voice to be a highlight because, well, it was really subpar. They double-tracked his voice, which is similar to what they did in I Wanna Be Your Man. However, I don't think Ringo Starr sounds that great double-tracked, at least in this song. This song also kind of pales in comparison to the other tracks from this EP. It's got a nice little country riff, and the guitar work is no doubt the highlight, but it really doesn't hold up on its own. It's not too memorable, and truly fits the okay category. It's a nice little cover, but unless you're a die-hard country fan, I'm not entirely sure what this song would have that would really want you coming back to it over the other country tracks the Beatles did. Now, it's got some nice parts in it for sure, but as a whole, it's really just okay.
It's good to me, you know she's happy as can be, you know she said so. I'm in love with her and I feel fine.
Next we get into the I Feel Fine single, starting off with I Feel Fine. This one is quite famous for a lot of reasons. First off, it's the first time in a record that guitar feedback was used. Feedback is mostly used during live shows, but I guess that John wanted to experiment a little bit, and as a result, the song is now in the history books. That's not even the highlight, because the guitar riff in this song is among their greatest. I said that What You're Doing's riff was amazing, but this one really rivals that as among their best. It carries the song on its back along with Ringo Starr's Latin-style drumming, which was inspired by Ray Charles, is what I'd say. The harmonies in this song are easily the vocal highlight because they're really breathless at times. Need I say it? This one is simply amazing. Sure, the lyrics are a bit standard, but the sound of this one easily triumphs. The words were also written to fit the guitar riff, so clearly Lennon wasn't putting anything personal into this one. It's not only memorable though because of the guitar feedback or riff, or even the unique drumming I mentioned, but it really signaled of what was to come in the future albums. In only their second year of fame, change was going to come in not only their lives, but in the music as well. Regardless, this one is definitely an all-time classic.
She's a woman who understands. She's a woman who loves her man.
You conclude with the B-side, She's a Woman. Paul McCartney is really the star in this one. His vocal performance here is pretty dang impressive. The song's melody is really his doing, and it all comes from his vocals. The guitar solo is also really fantastic, and then when the chorus comes, it's definitely the highlight of the song. Naturally, this one has to be good. Except, it's just okay. The biggest reason for that rating is because of that repeating guitar chord in the background, punctuating every 2 seconds. I really feel they didn't need to do that, because Paul's voice could have honestly carried this one alone. But they mixed this repeating guitar chord with the percussion, and as a result, it really gets degrading on the ears. It starts from the first second of the song and never lets up, except for the chorus and guitar solo, which are, ironically, the highlights of the song for me. It's the only problem though in the song, but because it persists throughout, that's why it ends up dragging this one to an okay rating. Similar to I'm Happy Just to Dance With You from the last album though, it's probably the best okay song I've covered. And that was Beatles For Sale, along with Long Tall Sally EP and the I Feel Fine single. That was a total of 20 songs I talked about just now, and if this video ends up being the longest one in the series, I think it makes sense why. Looking at the chart, there are 14 good songs and 6 okay songs, and 0 bad songs. If you only considered the Beatles For Sale album, there would be 10 good songs and 4 okay songs, which is actually a similar percentage to if you considered the other songs I talked about. This album as a whole was definitely a close call to being their worst so far. There were a lot of lackluster moments, which all happened to occur during the covers. It's hard to imagine that the Beatles, after their first 2 albums had a ton of great covers, ended up struggling with that on this album. However, they were constantly touring and doing promotion, so I could see that they probably had to consider songs that even they felt were mediocre just to get the song count to 14. It's unfortunate because I think if they had more time, we could have seen a lot more songs like No Reply and I'm a Loser. Sadly, the covers really ended up affecting this album. Despite that though, I'd still call this a good album just like the previous 3 because there's a ton of stuff on here that's really good. In fact, this album actually marked a progression from some of their older songs. I'll talk about that in a bit, but anyways, here's the album rankings. You might find it surprising that I put this one higher than with the Beatles, which is now sitting at last place. The reason is because I love the originals on this album more than I love the covers on With the Beatles. It was definitely close, but the tiebreaker was probably that With the Beatles had 1 bad song, while this album had 0 bad songs. It's still close though, and for those who liked Little Child, this album might actually be worse for you. Anyways, now come the song rankings, which have a ton of shifting around because I talked about a whopping 20 songs here. The important thing though is that I Want to Hold Your Hand is still number 1. It's definitely going to be difficult to top that song, but the other songs are definitely close. Now, let's conclude by talking about 3 observations I made during this album. The first is the point I talked about earlier, about the originals being better than the covers. Usually, every Beatles album has 14 tracks, and with the exception of A Hard Day's Night, 6 covers and 8 originals. The originals in this album were all really outstanding, and all 8 of the originals were good songs to me. Now, the covers were a different story. Of the 6 covers, only 2 were good, and obviously, none were bad at all. However, the rest were definitely lacking, and were really perceived as fillers by the Beatles. The 2 good covers, though, in Rock and Roll Music and Kansas City Hey Hey Hey, were definitely among their best songs. However, it was really inconsistent inside too, with the last 3 covers being decent enough to fill an album, but not good enough to transcend back past that. The originals from this album, though, were incredible. No Reply, I'm a Loser, and I Don't Want to Spoil the Party were great advancements in either lyrical content or just the atmosphere alone. All 3 happened to be John Lennon's compositions. However, Paul's songs Every Little Thing, I'll Follow the Sun, and What You're Doing also really shine musically with absolutely great guitar work. Then there's songs like 8 Days a Week and Babies in Black that had both Lennon and McCartney in their finest form. It's clear that their songs are advancing, and the amazing thing about that was the fact that they were only 1 year into their fame. The Beatles songs will only continue to evolve as we venture into 1965 and beyond. The next observation was the return of fillers. If you thought they were gone after A Hard Day's Night, well, they return in full force here. As I mentioned in With the Beatles, a filler is when a song is on an album, and it has little impact on the album by not bringing anything new to the table and whatnot. This album was absolutely loaded with these album fillers. All the covers on side 2 could be considered as fillers, and the Beatles even called songs like 8 Days a Week filler. It's disappointing, but with little time to spend on developing or writing new songs, album fillers are kind of the end result. Fortunately, none of the album fillers are bad, and I do enjoy some parts of the okay ones as well. The last observation is kind of the continuation of my minor rant I went on during Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby. The way an album ends is definitely important because it sets the stage for future releases. Twist and Shout ending Please Please Me signaled the hype that Beatlemania was going to generate. Money, That's What I Want did the same, while in I'll Be Back from A Hard Day's Night, it set up that pessimistic tone which picked up on this album. Now, by ending the album with an okay cover, I feel that this album didn't really set the tone for anything or finish strong. They tried to end the album with another rock and roll song, but I feel that after all the development that happened on this album, ending it with Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby doesn't really do it justice. They should have probably switched it with a song like 8 Days a Week or even What You're Doing. They probably should have switched it with a song like What You're Doing or even 8 Days a Week. Those two would have perfectly captured the conclusion much better. Obviously, this isn't a major complaint or anything from my part, but it definitely felt a little bit off not to have a good album closer after 3 straight albums of great finishes. So that does it for Beatles For Sale. It's not their worst album, but it definitely wasn't their best either. With the new film set to be created and a request for more Lennon McCartney originals, can Help restore the Beatles back to their bigger heights? Find out when I review both the film and the album, Help.